All right, let's look at the first activity for today, Monday, day 6. You're going to see that it is some graphing review with a data chart right here that is discussing library books and how many of each genre was checked out. So we are going to read the directions and then I'm going to help you set up your graph. Now, it is best if you are able to print this off so that you can just write and label directly on the graph. But if you are someone who does not have a printer, that is okay because on scrap paper you can just take your time and recreate this graph as best as you can for your graphing practice for today. So the directions say library books, data, and graph. Woodlawn Elementary School's librarian, Mr. Jackson, is keeping track of the kinds of books students check out. This chart shows the number of each kind of book the third graders have checked out so far this year. So you can see that the genres here are adventure, arts and crafts, biography, fantasy, fiction, graphic novels, science, and sports. Now, what we want to find out is what are we going to be graphing using this table? Well, it says the third grade teachers want to know more about what their students are reading. Create a bar graph showing the information Mr. Jackson collected. Each cell in the graph stands for 4 books checked out. Label and title your graph. So a couple of important things here that we need to look at. The first thing is that they want us to create here a bar graph, okay? And we need to know that each cell stands for 4 books, and they want us to label and title our graph. So I'm going to kind of refresh your memory on our graphing unit. We used the tails method. And this meant that we labeled our title, our axes, or our here and here, labeling those parts of our graph, and then also doing our intervals, so our numbers, and then also doing our labels, and then our spacing. Now, a lot of the time, this S part down here is already done for you, and here, if you are printing it off, that spacing is done for you. So really, we are just looking at tail, T-A-I-L. Okay, so I'm going to erase some of this, and I'm just going to get us a nice fresh graph to look at so we can begin doing tail on here to label how our graph is going to be. So again, we are doing tail. So we want to begin with a title. So think to yourself what a good title would be for this graph. I think that you could label this library books, and I'm going to have to zoom in just a little bit and get some of this stuff erased. I think that a great title could just be library books, but you can be creative here and come up with your own title. Remember, the title goes at the top of your graph, so I am going to be writing over our directions because I am using my draw tool on my laptop, but that is okay. Okay, so we have our title, which is library books. So that is done. Now we need to label our axis. So we're going to have to figure, okay, what is this going to represent? And then what is this going to represent? So typically on a bar graph, we know that our graph goes from the bottom to the top. So usually this part of our graph is going to be where our numbers or where our intervals go. And it did tell us that in this graph, each cell stands for 4 books. So if we were to label this graph, you would want to start down here is going to be 0, so no books were checked out for that genre. And then you are going to want to fill out each square as a multiple of 4. So if you have to, we know that the first one's going to be 4 after 0, but what's 4 plus 4 more? You're going to get 8. Plus 4 more, 12, plus 4 more, 16, and you're going to label this all the way up your graph. And this is kind of like we're doing kind of right now our axis step and our interval step kind of together. So we can label that this part of our graph here is going to be the number of books. The number of books checked out is what those numbers there represent. Now, thinking about what this part of our graph is going to show, well, if this part shows our number, this part is going to have to show our genre. So we are going to label this axis as our genre. And then you are going to look at each genre that's up here that you have, and you're going to label it here. So for example, the first one, let's see, the first one is adventure. So I would want to label my first one maybe as AD. And again, I don't have much space on my laptop, but you'll have more on your paper. So that might be adventure. And then there was arts and science. So you want to label each bar here the appropriate genre. Now, looking at our adventure bar, we're going to think about, okay, how many books did they check out for the adventure series? Wow, they checked out 32 books. So we're going to have to finish filling out this here. So 16 plus 4 more is 20, plus 4 more is 24, plus 4 more is 28, plus 4 more is 32, plus 4 more is 36. So this part is pretty much done for you, which typically on test questions that you'll see and in real life questions that you'll come in contact with just in real life or as you go throughout school, you usually aren't going to have to create intervals on your own anyway, so me giving you this really isn't a huge deal. So here's your intervals, and we said that the adventure genre, there were 32 books that were checked out. So we're going to take our pencil or our draw tool, whatever you're using, and we are going to shade up to 32 to represent that that genre had 32 books checked out. Okay, so thinking back to tail, we did our axis and our intervals, and we labeled. You're just going to be labeling not one of the genres, but all of them, all the way across your bar graph. Okay. So that is your bar graph itself. So for your independent practice, you are going to be thinking about how you can complete the graph using the data collection chart up here. So labeling each genre and then representing how many books were checked out by shading up on each bar. Now, of course, there are going to be questions. Questions like, which book was checked out the most? That's kind of another way to ask which book was the most popular. How many of them were checked out? So you're going to get to, after you create your graph, do some interpreting of your graph with these questions. And there's going to be a challenge at the bottom. If you have any questions on this, just let me know.